Hello everybody, welcome back. I am glad you're here. Today we're going to be talking about 1911s yet again, our favorite topic, and we're going to be asking the question, do Series 80 triggers suck? So I think it's worth making a standalone video for this topic because boy, I have had no less than 200 comments or messages about this very thing. Now, I brushed up against this topic in some recent videos, specifically the how to pick the right 1911 video. I recommend the Series 70 system because it's what I prefer, and I think they are plenty safe. I don't think there's a problem with them. And I talked about it a bit more in my recent video, Are 1911s Drop Safe? And, you know, I recommend you go watch that video. I'm not going to relitigate that here, but at the end of the day, two things are true. The Series 70 system is not drop safe. What is also true is I think they're perfectly safe because there is essentially no cases all the way back to the inception of the 1911 where this issue of 1911s being dropped and going off has been an issue. If it were an issue, they would have tried to rectify it a long time ago. In fact, I'll be honest, I had trouble finding more than 5 cases in all of time where this was like confirmed, corroborated, this really happened, the gun was dropped, went off, somebody got hurt. More than 5. I could not find more than 5. So for me, zero factor. I carry Series 70 guns all day, every day. I do not care about the fact that it's technically not drop safe because it's super unlikely. Now, with the mention of these topics and kind of brushing over the Series 80 system in recent videos, again, it's generated a ton of comments and conversation. Now, with the mention of these topics in recent videos, of course, inevitably human nature takes over and you start to get red versus blue very quickly. Tribalism creeps in, and before you know it, people are fighting in the comments with people they don't even know. And I'll just say this, I don't take an absolutist stance on this issue. I think there's some good Series 80 systems. I think there's some bad ones. Overall, I'll be really honest with you guys, I actually think it's an improvement. Not to the feel of the trigger, but hey, it does make the gun significantly safer. It all but eliminates the drop safety issue. I don't see how that's a bad thing. Now, where it starts to become a bad thing is when you start to screw with what makes the 1911 great, and that is the trigger. So for those of you who don't know, this trigger slides straight to the rear, which I can kind of illustrate right here, right? It's not like modern triggers that operate on a hinge like the high power, the Glock, the Beretta, pretty much every other pistol ever made. The 1911 trigger pull is legendary, and it's just one of the top 3 selling points of the pistol altogether. And so the criticism a lot of people have against Series 80 systems, including myself, is that you are taking away from that good trigger and essentially rendering the pistol not nearly as good, effective, comfortable, shootable over something that's a non-issue anyway. So that's the Series 70 argument side of the house. The Series 80 side of the house is, it's not that bad, it makes the gun safer, who cares, okay? And I totally, listen, I live in both camps. I don't have a hard, hot or cold stance on this topic. So let's just jump into some Series 80 conversation. So this is a Series 70 pistol. You guys know this one, my T-Sauce GI. And I love it, right? You get a really nice take-up, hard wall, crisp break. Man, I can just shoot this pistol super, super well. But when you get into Series 80 guns, very often, immediately, if you're paying any attention, that trigger starts to feel real weird, man. There's some Rube Goldberg machine stuff going on inside those pistols sometimes, and it just turns a lot of people off. So I want to highlight what I think is probably the worst version of the Series 80. And I'm going to use a Glock because I don't own a 1911 with this type of system. So you see this nice big silver button here, okay? So essentially what happens is, I'm going to reset the trigger. As you pull the trigger, pay attention to this guy right here, okay? As you pull the trigger, that guy slides to the rear, and it pushes this button in. And what happens is right now, this is blocking the firing pin from being able to come forward. And I'll illustrate this. If you guys can see the firing pin opening on the breech face there. So I'm pushing the striker forward, but then if I push this button, See if I can do this. Boop, there it goes. It pops out. So essentially by deactivating this button, pushing that button in, the firing pin can come forward, and it does make the pistol essentially impervious to being dropped and having an inadvertent discharge. The problem with a trigger actuated safety system is you are going to have to add length to the front of the trigger, or you're going to have a very tight set of actuation controls in that system. And generally people don't like to do that because it requires a lot of precision fitting, very small parts. So what they end up doing is adding a bunch of take up to the front of the trigger to accomplish this goal. So again, using the Glock as an example, this first little bit, my take up, there's a lot of mushy, crunchy, weird business going on. And what I'm feeling is that Series 80 system being deactivated. So that to me is the worst type of Series 80 system. But we're going to get back to that. Don't lose hope. The guys with your Colt 1991s or any other type of 1911s, don't lose hope yet. We're going to come back to there, and I'm going to say something about that. Now, I think the best type of Series 80 system is the Schwarz system. So these have been around a long time. They don't seem to be in too many guns, but honestly, I think they're kind of awesome. They're excellent. So essentially, instead of the Series 80 system being tied to the trigger and the firing pin block being deactivated by the trigger pull, this is tied to the grip safety. And if you can see right here, you can see that little guy pop up. Again, the point of my knife there. Okay, you can see that little guy pop up. So just by gripping the pistol, that little guy pops up, pushes in the firing pin block here on the slide, and honestly, you never even know the thing's there. I can't feel it. I can't sense any mechanism working. It's very subtle, and I think it being tied to the grip safety is the best way to do this, hands down. Because at the end of the day, you leave the original trigger system in the 1911 intact and untouched. So by merely grabbing the pistol, I have deactivated the firing pin safety. And now the trigger feels like a good old 1911 trigger. You got a little bit of take up. There's my wall. Press, press, press. Clean break, right? It feels like home. Now let's talk about the worst, in my opinion, the worst types of Series 80 system that I illustrated with the Glock there. And I want to revisit that. So why I think it, at the end of the day, may not matter is because of how the trigger interface works, how we pull a trigger. So I'm going to illustrate this with the Beretta 92. So I've got a snap cap in here, and I'm just illustrating this because a lot of these parts of the trigger pull are pretty exaggerated, and it'll make sense when you see it. Now, what we're about to talk about, can get seriously granular to the point of it's actually not helpful. So I'm sure people are going to roll in the comments and tell me something I missed, but for me, this is all the stuff that matters when it comes to the trigger pull process. So you guys feel free to comment, but for the sake of this conversation, this is enough. So what we have here, and this is just a little graph that I drew up, this is the way I think of it. You have several different stages of how we interface with the trigger. So the first stage is we have take up, and that is this stage right here, where essentially I'm pulling the trigger and, stuff's happening. You can see the firing pin blocks being deactivated on the Beretta there. You can see it pop up. Okay, so this has the same thing, firing pin block. So the take up is where that Series 80 system is activated and deactivated. But then we hit the wall. Okay, that's the next stage. The wall is where, the sear is being engaged, and that's where we start to feel that tension. We start to pull. Now, if the trigger's got some problems, the next stage is going to be creep. In an ideal situation, you pull, and then you have a sharp break with a sharp corner. And this is a feel thing. I'm not making a technical description here. This is just what it feels like. You pull, and you have a sharp break off with the trigger. Creep is where you're pulling, and you get sort of a little bit of That's the way I describe it. It kind of just, the sears, you're pulling and they slide on each other, but they don't break. They don't disengage. So you get this slide, then you get a break. Now, some people, they actually prefer creep. I know guys who do like real competition target shooting, like for accuracy, and they actually like a trigger that has a little bit of creep. It makes it more predictable for them, and that's what they're used to. No hate. But to me, I like a clean braking trigger. So you have pull, clean, snap, and then sometimes you have pull, slide, or creep, then it breaks. So we have our take up, we have the wall, you pull, maybe you have creep, maybe not, then you have your brake. Now what happens immediately after the brake sometimes is over travel. Now this is where you pull, brake, and then the trigger keeps traveling, if that makes sense. Not the end of the world, but it does create a little bit of a chaotic feeling trigger because you just have so many different stages and the feel of things going on. There's a lot happening with your trigger finger, and it does make it a little bit harder, not to be accurate, but to be accurate quicker, right? You want as few things happening in that trigger to really reset, reassess, and establish another pull, break, reset, reassess, okay? So again, we have take up, and let me get the Beretta back out here. So we have our take up, which is where even on 1911s, you have your firing pin block being disabled. You have the wall, pull, 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 pull. This has zero creep. You got your brake, and then you have your over travel, which is the distance the trigger travels past the brake point. Now, once you hit over travel, you can see this arrow. Now the trigger starts going the opposite direction, okay? So I'm going to hold this down. I'm going to reset the trigger. Okay, so I'm going to start letting out, and then the next thing you have is reset. Now, part of what makes the 1911 so great is not just the brake, but it's the reset. So right now the trigger has broken. I'm at my reset point. I'm going to start letting out, and watch this. Reset. But now I got to go back to get to the wall again. So again, we have all these stages, brake, but then we have to go all the way out to get a reset and then start reestablishing our pull. Whereas on a Series 70 system, you simply have take up, wall, brake, tiny bit of over travel. Now the trigger's been pulled. I'm going to go for the reset, boom, reset, and I'm right on the wall as soon as the trigger resets. So this allows you to live in that sweet space of trigger pull and reset. Now back to the original conversation, even if you have what I think is the worst version of a Series 80 trigger, it really doesn't matter in a lot of cases, and here's why. This is where you live, right here. Okay? So even though your Series 80 trigger might have all this take-up that's crunchy and gross and everything, that's not where you live. Or at least that's not where you should live. When you go to pull your trigger, you don't brake and then come all the way off and then push again and then come all the way off, right? No, you pull, you're at the wall, bang, you get a reset, you come out, reset. I never let off. So this front area up here, the take up, which is where the Series 80 system is most felt, I'm not paying attention to that. Once I'm shooting, I'm staying right here. My finger is going to stay engaged right at the wall. Brake, reset, stay at the wall. Brake, reset, stay at the wall. So I live right here. And I guess we can say like this. Sometimes your reset is in this middle portion somewhere in here as well. So that's why I firmly believe that if the trigger's done well in a Series 80 system, it doesn't have to suck. Now, to be frank with you, the Glock is actually a good example of this. So when the trigger is all the way out, I pull. Okay, so now I've got my take up. The firing pin block is disabled. It's off right now. I press. I do have some creep, lots of creep. Brake. But when I reset, I pop right to the wall. I didn't come all the way out. Out here is all my take up, right? So I live in this sweet spot from the wall to the brake, and I just go back and forth. And so that's why the guys who are rocking a Series 80 trigger, it doesn't really matter because they don't live in the place where the Series 80 system activation and deactivation can even be felt. Now, there are some Series 80 systems that suck all the way through. They alter the feel of the trigger at every stage so terribly, and that's why those I don't like. And a good example of that would be the Taurus. I had a Taurus 1911, the PT 1911, and that Series 80 system was terrible. Terrible. Now, that particular pistol I gave to a buddy just to, be a project gun. But I completely gutted that pistol all the way, and I replaced everything, and I turned that crappy Series 80 system into a pretty good feeling Series 80 system. I did not do a delete. I just put in better parts and fitted them so that everything feels smoother. So it can be altered and improved, but at the end of the day, there are some Series 80 systems that suck. But if it's a good break and you got a good reset and you're living in this sweet spot, don't worry that it's a Series 80. It's a benefit to the system at the end of the day. If I'm being objective about it, is blocking the firing pin from going off a bad thing? No, it's great. That's an improvement, as long as we don't mess with this thing right here. So those are my views on the Series 80 system. I'm not against them. I just, if I was going to say buy a gun online, which is what most of us do nowadays, and a lot of us, unfortunately, very unfortunately, don't go into gun stores much anymore and actually put our hands on guns before we buy them. If that's the case, I'm going to go with a brand that I know is, very consistent, and I'm going to go with a trigger system that I don't need to feel because I know it's going to be fine, right? And that's kind of why I stick with Series 70. However, there are those, example, the Kimber here, that it's got a Series 80 system and it's great. I don't even know it's there unless I talk about it with somebody or they ask me. It's sort of transparent to the feel of the gun. So I brought the high power up because it needs to be in this conversation. And I just want to point out that the high power has one of the funkiest, annoying triggers. It's fine. The brake is fine, and I've learned how to use it. But looking at this graph and the way all this works, this trigger is way worse than any Colt Series 80 I've ever fired. And the reason is single action, right? You got a bunch of take-up, a moderate amount of take-up. You get to the wall, and the wall's pretty far forward, a little farther forward than you would expect, but no big deal. You got your take-up, there's my wall, pull, brake. Okay, so the trigger goes to the rear. When I reset, the trigger goes even further to the rear after reset, but then it gets worse. I start coming out, and I want to live in this tiny little zone of brake and reset, right? Can't do it. Got to come all the way out. There's one reset. There's my second reset. That's almost impossible to perceive. You cannot feel it or hear it. You can barely see it. And so what you end up having to do is come all the way out and reestablish to make sure the trigger reset. This high power trigger, and particularly the older ones that have a magazine disconnect, there's so much mechanical, funky, funny business going on with these triggers. It's a very frustrating trigger to shoot with. Now, if there's only one thing that matters on a pistol as far as the trigger system goes, it is the brake. However, everything else about this pistol, this trigger, is very annoying. It takes a ton of focus just being super mentally engaged with my mind on this trigger to operate this pistol, whereas the 1911, it's intuitive. I don't have to think about it. I can focus on my sights. I can focus on getting hits. So just so you guys understand, the firing pin blocks and those safeties on 1911s, they're not that bad. It's not my preference, but if there's a way to do it where the brake and the reset are solid, actually, I don't even care. And the same thing is sort of true with the 92. You get your take-up, a lot of take-up, actually. There's your wall, brake, crispy brake, fantastic brake, which is what matters. You reset, you have to come out far again and then back again to the wall. So it's the same thing. I have to go way far out, reset, and then back up to the wall again. If I was to try to draw what this feels like in my mind, it feels like this. It feels like take up, press, there's my wall, brake. But then I have to come all the way out to find my reset, and then go back again to find the wall, press, 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 break. There's too many up and down and back and forth just that whole process. It doesn't make sense why it's set up that way. The 1911 feels like this. You got your take up, you have a sharp break wall, very short reset, press, 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 break. It looks like this. The movements are very tight and controlled, and there's not a bunch of clinking and clanking and moving far out and then back and crunching and this and no. It's just a very consistent pull, break, short, reset, pull, break, very short reset, like that. So I hope that makes sense. And I'm trying to illustrate, too, why the 1911 trigger is so good. And so if you have a Series 80 that feels like this, fantastic. There's nothing wrong with that. But when it feels like you have to do like the high power or the 92 there, where you have to pretty much just do this whole process every trigger pull, man, that sucks. That is a bad trigger. It doesn't matter what pistol it is. Now, some of you might be thinking, and I know I usually get one of these type of comments, well, I've been shooting for this many years and I've never even thought about this stuff and I do fine. Listen, I get it. But when you start shooting like long range and really going for accuracy and studying what makes accuracy happen, all this stuff, when you can hone these things in, understand them, and learn how to work with them, it really does make a difference. And you can go even deeper. Again, you can get into the whole like Olympic level shot process. There's a whole nother world that I'm not going to open up that can of worms. But you can get really detailed with this. But on a functional level, I think this is helpful to understand the different types of triggers. And really, I think it should hopefully settle your nerves. If you're thinking about a Series 80 gun, as long as you got this sweet spot intact, I think you're good to go, man. If not, I'm sticking Series 70 as much as I can. All right, guys. I hope that was helpful to you. Hopefully that made sense. And I look forward to your comments. We'll see you next time.